So, any questions out there in the audience for any of the panellists? One up the back.
So I'm Richard from TripMeasure, and my question's for Craig, but potentially the whole panel. Just curious why there's this disconnect from demand for security experts and people seeming unable to find them, but also there being an oversupply of security experts. What you sort of hinted at the beginning of your talk, Craig.
Okay, I'm going to be honest, I'm really struggling to hear the question.
The question was, we've talked about a demand for security experts, and yet you expressed that there might be an oversupply, I think, around your question.
No, sorry, I wasn't expressing that there was an oversupply. Just to clarify that. What I was describing there was we're starting to get the education segment already moving in this space. There is certainly not an oversupply, but one of the points I wanted to make is that the work has already started. So whilst these announcements have been made in the past year and there's been commentary, oh, what's happened here, what's happened there, the work has already started. Those job-ready candidates are starting to come out the door. Now, when I start, I can give you 50 now, and whatever, they're available. We need so many more, and we need more skill sets. So certainly not an oversupply, because we will never have an oversupply in this market, but we really got to get serious about identifying talent and helping them to learn more.
Cool. Thanks.
Any other questions?
Robert Neely from Landra and Rogers Lawyers. There was a comment made earlier about when, in the context of cyber security, not needing to know who was trying to get in through the window. So, to use your analogy of the break-in, is that true? I mean, I've heard different views about the need to actually understand more about where the threats are coming from, and even going out and quite actively seeking out those who are seeking to hack you as a necessary part of the overall security set. So I'd be interested if anyone else had any comments on that.
I might ask Greg to respond to that one, given the work you're doing at Microsoft.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of my comment about attribution being mostly a distraction for most organisations, obviously it's not completely that way. So intelligence agencies, law enforcement agencies whose goal is to actually understand those actors to be able to provide information to organisations, obviously attribution for those guys is quite important. But when we talk about the average organisation, or even larger enterprises that are trying to protect their critical assets and their information, they really need to be focused on what's happening in their environment, potentially how compromises and incidents are happening, not necessarily focusing and spending personnel resources and time to work out where it's coming from. The real key when you actually start to respond to a cybersecurity incident is understanding what's gone on, how you defend against it, how you clean it up, and what you do to prevent it from happening again in the future, not necessarily where it's coming from. And that's the context behind which I was talking about that.
Any other questions in the front?
So my question is to the panel, so it's Carl McNaughton. So when you start to look at cybersecurity, you speak about risk and resilience, sort of mitigating that as a fact. So when you look at the CapEx, the OpEx purchase, which typically lie on a balance sheet or a P&L for organisation, how can we position cybersecurity risk and resilience as more of a revenue-driving asset rather than a pure expenditure, which is going to be a burden on a P&L for the board?
Yeah.
I think banks typify that. In 2003, when we set up the High-Tech Crime Centre and we spoke to banks, they would do the P&L discussion. You'd speak to them about how to drive down certain types of crime, and they would look at you and say, but see the black ink here and the red ink there, the black outweighs the red. Banks don't do that anymore. Banks talk about this as a reputational or brand issue. It's about trust, and trust is a really different equation to just a P&L. I think the larger companies in this country get that now, and I think it's spreading, that it shouldn't just be seen as an overhead. I think particularly if you look at it from a customer perspective, there's an expectation that your data will be protected, that the right thing will be done with it, and that the right services will be provided. And certainly that's increasingly the view in government as well, that it becomes that trust brand issue as opposed to just the very binary, is this a cost that we want to have on our books or not?
And I'd add to that and say, often the security team historically has been seen as the team that says no, like computer says no, because they say, oh no, there's risk there, we can't do that. And I think I'm seeing a kind of training, refocus of that team to say, not no, but yes, and here's how we can do it. And it's a very important mind shift for security people to understand that if they do their job right, if they say yes and here's how, then what they're doing is enabling the business initiatives that will drive, massive increase in revenue and profitability, etc. Whereas if they say no, they're crippling the business and therefore crippling revenue growth. And I think it's far more important to change the entire way you think of security, and that probably has to come from the board down to say it's an enabler. I can execute on my business plan if I get security right, and if I get it wrong, I may ruin or cripple the business. So it's an enabler, not an inhibitor, and that is a mind shift for some people.
That's a good point.
So I think we have run out of time for questions.